The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward like a cathedral made of light and ancient stone. Its walls covered with symbols from civilizations that had ruled the stars when Earth was still a ball of molten rock spinning in the darkness. Ambassador Elena Vance walked alone across the polished floor, her boots making soft sounds that echoed in the vast space above her head. And she felt very small beneath the towering seats where the 12 most powerful beings in the known galaxy watched her approach. With eyes and sensors and organs she could not even name, she was 53 years old. A former soldier who had traded her rifle for diplomatic credentials. And she carried herself with the straight spine of someone who had seen death and decided not to fear it anymore. The council members looked down at her from their elevated platforms, each one representing a species that had mastered faster-than-light travel before humanity learned to make fire. And their expressions ranged from bored indifference to barely concealed amusement. High Arbiter Selene of the Luminari sat at the center, her body made of living light that shifted through colors Elena had no words for. And when she spoke, her voice resonated directly in the minds of everyone present. Ambassador Vance, you have requested an emergency session of this council, a privilege rarely granted to species of your standing. So we trust your matter is of genuine importance. Elena activated her holographic display, and the air before her filled with star charts and sensor readings and data streams that painted the darkness between galaxies in shades of warning red. 3 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected movement in the region we call the Hollow, she began, keeping her voice steady despite the weight of their stares. This is the empty zone beyond the outer spiral arm, where no civilization has ever established presence. Councillor Yethrix of the Kethrani hegemony clicked his mandibles together in a sound that translated roughly as dismissive laughter. His insectoid body gleaming under the chamber lights like polished obsidian. The Hollow has been empty since before my species achieved sentience, he said. It is a void, Ambassador, nothing more than a cosmic desert where the conditions for life never developed. Elena pulled up the next image, showing a cluster of gravitational anomalies that pulsed with rhythmic precision. These readings suggest otherwise. She continued, we have detected organized movement, Counselor, patterns that indicate intelligence and purpose. And 17 of our unmanned probes sent to investigate have simply vanished. The Vorn representative, a massive crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as harmonic vibrations, hummed with skepticism. Equipment failure is common in unexplored regions. The translation system rendered its song into words. Your species has been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries. So perhaps you are unfamiliar with the technical challenges of deep space operations. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she pushed it down, because anger would only confirm their belief that humans were too primitive and emotional for serious galactic affairs. With respect, Counselor, we have accounted for equipment failure, she said. Pulling up transmission logs, these probes sent final signals before going dark, and each one recorded the same thing, visual data showing something moving against the background stars. Something vast enough to block out entire constellations. She displayed the image on the main screen, and for a moment, the chamber fell silent as 12 ancient species looked upon a photograph of absolute darkness shaped like a hunger that had no end. Then Yethrix laughed again, and the tension broke like a soap bubble. Shadows, he declared. You have brought us shadows and asked us to fear them, Ambassador Vance. And I must say I expected better from the species that allegedly conquered its own moon. The other council members joined in with their own versions of amusement. A symphony of clicks and hums and bioluminescent flickers that made Elena feel like a child, presenting finger paintings to a gallery of master artists. High Arbiter Solane raised one luminous hand and the laughter subsided. Ambassador, humanity is young and it is natural for young species to see threats in every unknown darkness, she said, her tone gentle in a way that somehow made the condescension worse. We have monitored the Hollow for 10,000 years and found nothing of concern. So perhaps your sensors are malfunctioning, or perhaps your scientists are misinterpreting natural phenomena. Elena stepped forward, abandoning protocol in her frustration. And if we are right? She demanded. If something is out there and it reaches civilized space while we are unprepared, what then? The Arbiter's light pulsed with patience. Then we shall deal with it, as we have dealt with every challenge in our long history, she replied. The combined fleets of the Council have never been defeated, Ambassador. And no force in this galaxy or any other could threaten our collective might. Elena wanted to scream at them, wanted to throw the data in their faces and demand they look at it properly. But she had been a soldier, long enough to know when a battle was lost before it began. She gathered her files and straightened her uniform. I formally request that my warning be entered into the Council's permanent record, she said, her voice cold now, stripped of pleading. When something substantial arrives, I want there to be no confusion about who saw it coming. Yethrix waved one of his forearms dismissively. Your request is granted. For whatever comfort it provides you, Elena turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber like a countdown that none of them recognized. And at the door she paused and looked back at the 12 beings who held the fate of countless worlds in their ancient hands. The thing about shadows, counselors, is that something has to cast them, she said. And whatever is casting these shadows is big enough to blot out stars. She left them sitting in their elevated seats, surrounded by the comfortable certainty of 10,000 years of supremacy, never once considering that supremacy could end outside the chamber. Her aide Marcus fell into step beside her. How did it go? He asked, though her expression already told him the answer. They laughed, Elena said simply. They looked at the evidence, and they laughed, and they sent me away like a child afraid of monsters under the bed. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What do we do now? Elena stopped walking and stared out a nearby window at the stars that glittered like scattered diamonds against the infinite black. We prepare, she said. We watch and we wait and we prepare, because something is coming, Marcus. I can feel it in my bones, the way I used to feel ambushes before the first shot was fired. She placed her hand against the cold glass. And when it arrives, when the Council finally understands what we tried to tell them, we will be ready to say the 4 words that every ignored prophet eventually gets to speak. What words? Elena smiled, but there was no joy in it. We told you so. The Kethrani border fleet was the pride of the hegemony. 400 warships bristling with weapons that could shatter moons and shields, strong enough to swim through the heart of a star. And it had patrolled the edge of civilized space for 6,000 years without ever encountering a threat it could not crush. Commander Vethkal stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Mandate, watching the stars drift past on the main view screen while his crew performed their routine duties with the bored efficiency of soldiers who had never known real war. Anything to report? He asked his sensor officer, the same question he asked every shift, expecting the same answer he always received. But today the answer was different. Commander, I am detecting an anomaly at the edge of our scanning range, the officer said, her antennae twitching with confusion. It appears to be a region of space where no light exists. Vethkal leaned forward in his command chair. Clarify that statement. I cannot. Commander, because it makes no sense, she replied. There is a section of space approximately 10,000 kilometers across where I am reading nothing at all. No stars behind it, no radiation, no particles, simply nothing. The commander felt something cold crawl down his segmented spine, a sensation he had not experienced since his training days when instructors would simulate overwhelming enemy forces. Send a probe to investigate and alert the rest of the fleet to defensive positions. The probe launched, and its telemetry filled the bridge screens with data that grew stranger by the second, because the darkness was not stationary. It was moving toward them at speeds that should have been impossible for something so vast. "Commander," the sensor officer said, her voice trembling now, "the anomaly is not alone. I am detecting more of them, dozens of them, emerging from behind the first." Vethkal opened a channel to Counselor Yethrix on the homeworld. "Counselor, this is Commander Vethkal of the Border Fleet. We have encountered unknown entities matching the description in the human ambassador's warning. Requesting immediate reinforcements," Static answered him. And then a voice that was not the counselor. "There is no one left to send reinforcements." The channel died, and the lights on the bridge flickered, and the darkness on the view screen grew larger and larger until it filled the entire frame, and Commander Vethkal finally understood that 10,000 years of supremacy meant nothing to something that had been waiting in the void since before the first Kethrani learned to count. His last transmission was a single image. Darkness moving against the stars, like a mouth opening to swallow everything that ever dared to shine. 3 weeks later, the Vorn Collective lost 2 colony worlds. The disappearances happened simultaneously on planets 17 light-years apart. A coordinated strike that should have been impossible given the distances involved. And the investigation teams that arrived found something worse than destruction. They found silence on Vorm Prime 7. A city of 3 million crystalline beings sat empty and still. Meals half consumed on tables. Vehicles stopped in the middle of roads. Factories humming along with no workers to tend them. And in a residential district, the investigators found a nursery where tiny crystal formations that would have grown into children sat in their cradles untouched. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was burned or broken or showed signs of struggle. The inhabitants had simply ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. High Arbiter Solin convened an emergency session of the Council, her light flickering with emotions that her species had not felt in millennia. And the great chamber that had echoed with laughter 3 months ago now resonated with fear. "We have lost contact with the Kethrani border fleet," she announced. "All 400 vessels and their crews have vanished without trace. And Counselor Yethrix himself is among the missing. Last seen aboard the command station at the hegemony's outer frontier." The remaining council members shifted uneasily in their seats. The Vorn Collective reports the complete disappearance of 17 million citizens across 2 worlds. Solène continued, "No bodies have been recovered because there are no bodies to recover. Our people have been taken, removed from existence itself." She paused, and her light dimmed with the weight of what she had to say next. "We must contact the humans." Ambassador Elena Vance received the transmission aboard a passenger vessel returning to Earth. A priority message marked with diplomatic seals she had never seen used before. The Council was asking for help. She read their words carefully, noting how the arrogance had drained away like water through sand. How the condescension had transformed into something that looked very much like desperation. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin was aboard the UNS Defiance when his communication officer handed him the decoded message from Earth Command. Orders to divert his fleet to Council space and render whatever assistance the situation required. He was a compact man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too many friends die in wars that history books would call minor skirmishes. And he read the orders twice before allowing himself a single bitter laugh. "They laughed at her," he said to no one in particular. Ambassador Vance stood in their precious council chamber and begged them to prepare, and they laughed at her like she was a fool. His executive officer, Commander Sarah Park, waited in silence, knowing that the Admiral was not finished. "Send them everything," Chun finally said. "Every probe reading, every analysis, every theory our scientists have developed about what might be lurking in the hollow. Hold nothing back. And our fleet, Admiral? Chum stood and walked to the viewport, where the stars stretched and blurred as they. Defiance moved at speeds that would have seemed like magic to his grandparents. We go to help them, he said. Not because they deserve it and not because they asked nicely, but because whatever is out there does not distinguish between species that mocked us and species that listened. He turned back to face his crew and sent a message to Ambassador Vance. Tell her that the Council is ready to hear her warning now. Tell her that she was right and they were wrong, and now they need her to come back and help them understand what they refused to see. Park nodded and began transmitting the orders. Admiral, she said quietly, do you think we can actually stop this thing? Chun was silent for a long moment. I think humanity has been preparing for something like this since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back, he said. I think every war we ever fought, every nightmare we ever survived, was practice for the moment when something worse than ourselves came calling. He smiled, but his eyes remained hard. The Council has technology we cannot match and fleets that dwarf our own and knowledge, accumulated over millennia we cannot comprehend, he said. But they have never faced something they could not understand, something that does not play by the rules they have always taken for granted. And we have? Admiral Chun thought of Earth's history. The trenches and the gas chambers and the nuclear fires and the countless ways humanity had found to make itself suffer. We have been the monster in the dark, he said. We know how it thinks. Dr. Maya Chun had not slept in 4 days, and her hands trembled as she manipulated the holographic display showing the fragment. They had recovered from the edge of Vorn space. A piece of something that had broken off from one of the shadow vessels during the attack on the colony worlds. She was one of Earth's foremost xenobiologists, a woman who had dedicated her life to understanding alien life forms, and nothing in her 30 years of research had prepared her for what she was looking at now. It does not make sense, she muttered for perhaps the 100th time. Nothing about this makes sense. The fragment was not metal or ceramic or any material known to Council science. And under magnification, it appeared to be made of solidified darkness itself. As if someone had taken the absence of light and given it physical form. Her colleague, Dr. James Wright, entered the laboratory with fresh coffee that neither of them would drink. Any progress? He asked. Maya shook her head. It does not matter in any way we understand the term, she said. It has mass but no atomic structure. It occupies space but does not interact with electromagnetic radiation. And when I tried to cut a sample for analysis, it simply absorbed the cutting tool. Absorbed? The tool touched the fragment and ceased to exist, Maya explained. Not destroyed or broken down, just gone, as if it had never been. She pulled up another display showing neural scans from the few survivors of the early attacks. Council personnel who had escaped through luck or distance before their ships were overwhelmed. Look at these readings, she said. Every survivor shows the same pattern. Massive trauma to the regions of the brain associated with consciousness and identity. As if something reached into their minds and tried to pull out everything that made them who they are. Wright studied the scans with growing horror. You think these things are feeding on consciousness? I think they are harvesting it, Maya replied. The empty colonies, the vanished fleets, the survivors who escaped with damaged minds, it all points to the same conclusion. These entities consume sentient thought, the way we consume food. She switched to a star chart showing the hollow and the path. The shadow vessels had taken into civilized space. They slept out there for eons, waiting in the darkness between galaxies while life evolved and spread and developed intelligence across 1,000 worlds, she said. And now they have woken up because the harvest is finally ripe. The Council named them the Silence, but humanity called them the Absence. and the fleet that gathered to face them at the Battle of Shattered Dawn was the largest ever assembled in galactic history. 2,400 warships from 12 species formed a wall of metal and energy at the edge of the Void system. Their combined firepower capable of cracking planets and their shields strong, enough to withstand the fury of collapsing stars. Admiral Chen Wei-lin watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the human contingent took its position on the flank. 200 vessels that looked like toys compared to the massive dreadnoughts of the Council races. All ships report ready. Admiral, Commander Park announced, and the enemy? Approaching from the hollow. Estimated contact in 30 minutes. Chun nodded and opened a channel to the combined fleet. This is Admiral Chun to all vessels. We face an enemy unlike anything in our histories. An enemy that does not fight for territory or resources or ideology. An enemy that views us as nothing more than food. He paused, letting his words sink in across 1,000 bridges. Today we teach them that this food bites back. The absence emerged from darkness like nightmares given form. Hundreds of shadow vessels that moved without propulsion and struck without weapons and killed without touching their victims. The first wave of Council missiles detonated against the lead vessels and accomplished nothing. Their explosive force simply swallowed by the darkness, absorbed into something that had no surface to damage and no structure to destroy. The Luminary flagship fired its main weapon, a beam of concentrated stellar energy that could vaporize asteroids at 1,000 kilometers. And the shadow vessel it targeted did not even slow down as the beam passed through it like light through smoke. All weapons ineffective. The tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with fear. They are not reacting to our attacks. Chun watched the view screen as the shadow vessels drifted closer, moving with the lazy patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Focus fire on the lead vessel, he ordered. Everything we have. 200 human ships unleashed their arsenal. Nuclear missiles and railgun rounds and energy beams and experimental weapons that Earth Command had never authorized for deployment. A storm of destruction that would have reduced a moon to rubble. The shadow vessel absorbed it all and kept coming. And then the screaming started across the combined fleet. Crew members began to collapse, clutching their heads as something invisible reached into their minds and began to pull. And Chun felt it too. A cold presence at the edge of his thoughts trying to find purchase. Trying to drag out everything that made him who he was, Admiral. We are losing ships, Park gasped, fighting against her own invading darkness. The Kathrani command carrier just went dark. Life signs dropping across all decks. Chun gripped his command chair as the presence in his mind grew stronger. Order all human vessels to fall back, he commanded through gritted teeth. Full retreat to the secondary position. We cannot abandon the Council fleet. The Council fleet is already lost, Chun replied. And even as he spoke the words, he watched the massive Luminary dreadnought drift into silence. Its lights going dark one by one as its crew of 10,000 was harvested. The battle lasted 47 minutes of the 2,400 Council ships that engaged. 11 escaped, limping away with skeleton crews and shattered minds, carrying tales of an enemy that could not be fought with weapons or shields or any technology the galaxy had ever developed. The human fleet lost 60 vessels, but managed to extract most of its personnel, falling back in ordered retreat while Chun screamed defiance at the shadows through a communication channel they probably could not even perceive. High Arbiter Solen's message reached Earth 3 days later. Her light had dimmed to a pale flicker of what it once was, and her words carried the weight of absolute defeat. We were wrong, she said simply. We were arrogant and blind, and we dismissed your warnings because we could not imagine anything that our power could not overcome. She paused, and her light flickered with something that might have been shame. If your species has any solution we overlooked, any strategy we dismissed, any wisdom we were too proud to consider, we are prepared to listen. The galaxy is prepared to listen. Because without your help, there will be no galaxy left to save. Admiral Chen watched the recording in his quarters, alone with the weight of what came next. The Council had spent 10,000 years believing they were the apex of creation. And in 47 minutes, they had learned they were nothing but food for something older and hungrier than they could comprehend. Now they were asking humanity for help, and humanity, Chen knew, had exactly one thing to offer that the Council lacked: not better weapons or stronger shields or more advanced technology, something far more terrible: the willingness to suffer. Ambassador Elena Vance stood before the Council once again. But this time, no one was laughing. The great chamber felt smaller somehow. Its grandeur diminished. By the empty seats where Councillor Yethrix and 3 other representatives had once sat before their species, lost too many worlds to maintain their positions. On the galactic stage, High Arbiter Solin looked down. Elena, with eyes that had witnessed the impossible, the defeat of everything she had believed eternal, and her light was steady but dim. Ambassador Vance, "We have asked you here because we have no other options," she said. And the admission seemed to cost her something fundamental. "Your species warned us, and we did not listen, and now we face extinction unless someone can find a way to stop the absence." Elena nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty." "High Arbiter, we do not deserve appreciation," Solin replied. "We deserve the consequences of our arrogance. But billions of innocent beings across hundreds of worlds do not deserve to die because their leaders were fools." Elena activated her holographic display. But instead of sensor data or tactical readouts, she showed something the Council had never seen before human history. "You expected us to bring weapons," she said as images flickered across the chamber. Trenches filled with soldiers who would spend years fighting over a few kilometers of mud. "You expected some secret technology that would save you the way your technology has always saved you before." The images shifted to show cities burning, families separated, children crying in the rubble of their homes. But weapons cannot defeat the absence. "You proved that at Shattered Dawn, when the most powerful fleet in galactic history lasted less than an hour." Solen's light flickered with impatience. "Then, what can you offer us, Ambassador?" Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We can offer you something you have never had to develop. Something your 10,000 years of supremacy made unnecessary." She pulled up more images. Concentration camps and nuclear shadows and mass graves, and all the horrors that humanity had inflicted upon itself. Since the first cave dweller picked up a rock and realized it could be used to crush a skull, you have fought wars for rational reasons, Elena continued. Territory and resources and ideology. Clean conflicts with clear objectives where surrender was always an option. The Council members shifted uncomfortably as the images grew worse. "We have fought wars because we hated each other," Elena said. "We have fought wars we knew we could not win simply to ensure our enemies could not enjoy their victory. We have crawled through hell with our fingernails when our weapons were gone because spite is a fuel that never runs out." She turned to face the Arbiter directly. "The absence feeds on consciousness." "Yes, but consciousness is not a simple thing. It comes in flavors and textures, and some of those flavors are harder to digest than others." Admiral Chun appeared via hologram, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with something fierce. "Our scientists have analyzed the survivors of absence attacks," he said. "The entities target the bright and clear parts of consciousness first. The memories of joy and peace and contentment, because those are the easiest to consume." He pulled up neural scans showing the patterns Maya-Chun had discovered, but there are other parts of consciousness. Darker parts, The trauma and the rage and the desperate determination to keep fighting even when all hope is lost. And these parts create feedback patterns that the absence cannot process efficiently. Selene leaned forward. You are saying that human minds are somehow poisonous to these creatures? Not poisonous, Elena replied. Difficult, uncomfortable. Like trying to swallow food that fights back on the way down. She gestured, and the holographic display showed a network of installations spreading out from civilized space. Toward the hollow, we have already begun deploying a network of deep space stations in the path of the absence advance, she said. Each station is crewed by human volunteers who understand exactly what they're signing up for, which is death, Elena said simply. Painful, horrible death at the hands of entities that will reach into their minds and try to consume everything they are. The council chamber fell silent, but while they are dying, while they are experiencing the worst moments any sentient being can endure, they will be transmitting data back to our scientists, Elena continued. Every second they maintain consciousness, every moment they refuse to give in, will teach us more about how the absence functions and where its limitations lie. Selene's light pulsed with something between horror and disbelief. You are asking your people to volunteer for torture. We are not asking, Admiral Chun replied. They are volunteering. There is a waiting list 3,000 names long, and it grows every day. The Vorm representative hummed a discordant note. No species would willingly sacrifice its own people in such a manner, it said. This must be coercion or deception. Elena shook her head. You do not understand what we are, she said quietly. You see our short history and our primitive technology, and you assume you know what kind of people we are. But you have only seen the face we show to strangers. She pulled up one final image. A photograph of a young woman in a military uniform, smiling at the camera. This is Lieutenant Sarah Okafor, Elena said. She volunteered for the first deep space station, knowing she would never return, knowing exactly what the absence would do to her mind. And do you know what she said when they asked her why? The council waited in silence. She said that her grandmother survived a genocide on Earth, that she crawled through a river of bodies to escape soldiers who wanted to kill her simply because of the tribe she was born into, and that if grandmother could survive that, then Sarah could survive anything long enough to send back useful data. Elena let the image linger. That is what you are dealing with. A species that has spent its entire existence learning how to endure the unendurable. And now we are finally going to put those skills to use. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. The stations are already online, he said. The first absence vessels should reach them within 72 hours. And when they do, we will learn more about our enemy in 1 week than the Council learned in the entire battle at Shattered Dawn. High Armator Selene was quiet for a long moment. And what do you ask from us in return for this sacrifice? Elena met her gaze without flinching. We ask you to watch, she said. Watch what our people endure and remember it when this is over. Remember that the species you dismissed as primitive, children saved your galaxy by doing something you could never imagine doing yourselves. She turned and walked toward the exit. And when we finally figure out how to defeat these things, when we find the weapon or the strategy or the weakness that ends this war, we ask that you follow our lead without question, even if what we ask seems cruel or irrational or beneath your dignity. She paused at the door, because we are going to win this war the human way. And the human way has never been pretty. 72 hours later, the first deep space station made contact with the absent Lieutenant Sarah. Okafor transmitted for 18 minutes while the entities tried to consume her mind, screaming defiance into the void, even as pieces of her consciousness were torn away. And when she finally went silent, the data she had gathered represented the single largest breakthrough in understanding. The enemy that anyone had achieved 3,000. Volunteers waited for their turn to do the same, and somewhere in the hollow, For the first time in their eternal existence, the absence encountered prey that did not simply accept being eaten. 6 months, that is how long. Humanity held the line while scientists across 100 worlds analyzed data, purchased with screaming and sacrifice and the slow consumption of human minds. 417 volunteers died on those deep space stations, each one transmitting until the very moment their consciousness was extinguished, and each one adding another piece to the puzzle that Dr. Maya Chen was desperately trying to solve. She had not left her laboratory in weeks, surviving on caffeine and determination and the faces of the dead that haunted her dreams every time she closed her eyes. There has to be a pattern, she muttered, scrolling through neural data from the latest volunteer, a young man named Marcus Webb, who had lasted an unprecedented 23 minutes before going silent. They are taking something, but they are also leaving something behind. Her colleague James Wright placed a hand on her shoulder. Maya, you need rest. Rest will not bring them back, she replied without looking up. Rest will not stop the next attack. Only answers will do that, and the answers are here somewhere. I can feel them. She pulled up the neural scans side by side, comparing the patterns of consumption across dozens of volunteers, and something caught her eye. James, look at this. He leaned in and frowned at the display. What am I seeing? The absence always starts with the same regions, Maya said, excitement building in her voice. They target the prefrontal cortex first, the parts associated with peace and contentment and rational thought. We knew that already. Yes. But look at what happens when they encounter these other regions. Maya highlighted a cluster of neural patterns. The amygdala, the limbic system, the structures associated with fear and rage and trauma. The consumption rate drops dramatically. She pulled up more data. Marcus Webb lasted 23 minutes because he was a survivor of the Mars colony disaster. His brain was saturated with trauma responses that the absence could not efficiently process. Wright's eyes widened. You are saying that damaged minds are harder for them to consume. Not damaged, Maya replied. Hardened, tempered. Like metal that has been through fire, so many times it becomes too tough to break. She stood up suddenly, scattering data pads across the floor. We have been thinking about this wrong, she said. We assumed the absence was invulnerable because physical weapons cannot harm them. But they are not invulnerable at all. They are just vulnerable to something we never thought of as a weapon, which is. Maya smiled, and for the first time in months, there was hope in her expression. Pain, she said. Human pain, concentrated and refined and weaponized. Minds so saturated with trauma and determination and refusal to surrender that consuming them becomes more trouble than it is worth. She reached for the communication terminal. Get me Admiral Chun immediately. The Battle of Burning Silence was not fought with missiles or energy beams or any weapon the Council would have recognized. It was fought with human minds. Admiral Chun's fleet approached the absence formation with 300 vessels crewed entirely by volunteers who had undergone a process that no Council species would have ever conceived, much less permitted psychological conditioning designed not to suppress fear but to amplify it, to concentrate every dark memory and every moment of despair and every refusal to die into a burning core of consciousness that the absence would find impossible to digest. Pilot Jessica Vance sat in the cockpit of her fighter, her hands steady on the controls despite the screaming inside her skull. She was Elena Vance's daughter, and she had volunteered the moment she heard what was required. The conditioning had brought back every nightmare of her childhood. The fear of monsters in the dark, and the grief when her father died, and the rage she had felt watching the Council dismiss her mother's warnings. And it had compressed all of those feelings into something that burned like a star at the center of her being. All wings. "This is Admiral Chun." His voice crackled over the communication system. "We are approaching engagement range. Remember your training and remember what you are fighting for." He paused, and remember that the thing about humans is we are too stubborn to die when logic says we should. Jessica pushed her fighter forward as the shadow vessels loomed ahead, vast and dark and hungry. And she felt the first touch of the absence against her mind like cold fingers trying to find purchase on oiled glass. It hurt. It hurt worse than anything she had ever experienced. Worse than the conditioning, worse than the memories it had stirred up. But the pain was familiar now, and she had learned to transform it into fuel. "You want my mind?" She screamed into the void. "Come and take it. But I warn you that I am my mother's daughter, and we do not give up easily." She flew straight at the nearest shadow vessel, her weapons firing uselessly but her mind blazing like a beacon of defiant agony. And she felt the absence recoil as it tried to consume her and found only fire across the battlefield. 300 ships did the same. 300 crews of humans who had transformed their capacity for suffering into a weapon that the absence had never encountered. The shadow vessels hesitated for the first time in their eternal existence. They faced prey that was actively painful to consume. Minds so hardened by trauma and determination that every attempt to feed was met with burning resistance. And then they began to retreat, not destroyed. Not defeated in any traditional sense, but driven back by the simple fact that humans were not worth the effort. That the galaxy contained easier prey, and the cost of consuming these strange, stubborn creatures was too high. Jessica watched the darkness recede, tears streaming down her face as the pressure in her mind slowly released Admiral. She transmitted, her voice hoarse. "They are withdrawing. The absence is withdrawing." Chun's voice came back, thick with emotion. "All ships, maintain formation and keep pushing. Do not give them a chance to reconsider." They drove the absence back across 3 star systems, losing ships and crews along the way, but never stopping, never allowing the entities to rest or regroup. And somewhere in the darkness, the ancient hunger that had woken to feast on the galaxy decided that this particular meal was not worth the trouble. The final engagement took place at the edge of the hollow itself. Humanity's battered fleet facing the gathered mass of shadow vessels. And for a long moment, neither side moved. Then the absence turned and vanished into the void, retreating to the darkness from which they had emerged. And the galaxy fell silent once more 6 months later. The council held a ceremony at the site of the final battle. They erected a monument larger than most space stations, a massive structure bearing the names of every human who had died in the war. 417 volunteers on the deep space stations and 12,000 crew members from the fleet that had pushed the absence back into the hollow. Ambassador Elena Vance gave the keynote address, her hair gray now and her face lined with the weight of everything she had witnessed. She did not mention the council's initial dismissal, did not demand apologies or acknowledgement, did not say any of the bitter words that would have been so satisfying. She simply read the names of the fallen, one by one, until the stars themselves seemed to dim in respect afterward. High Arbiter Solène approached her privately. Her light had returned to its full brightness, but something in its quality had changed. Tempered by humility, "We underestimated your species," she admitted. "We saw your brief history and your primitive technology, and we assumed we knew what you were capable of." Elena smiled, tired but genuine. "You saw what we showed you." Clean ambassadors in pressed uniforms talking about peace and cooperation. "You never saw what we become when something threatens what we love. And if we had heeded your warning from the beginning." Solène asked, "If we had prepared, as you suggested?" "Then maybe half those names would not be up there," Elena replied, glancing at the monument, "but the other half would have volunteered anyway. That is the part you still do not understand about us." She began to walk away, then paused. "We are not brave," she said quietly. We are not fearless or noble or any of the things your histories will probably say about us. We are just stubborn. Too stubborn to accept defeat, even when every rational calculation says we should. She looked up at the endless cascade of human names carved into eternal stone. And sometimes that is enough. Solène watched her go. The human ambassador disappearing into the crowd of dignitaries and survivors. And she thought about everything she had learned in the past year. She had learned that power was not the same as strength. That 10,000 years of supremacy could vanish in moments against an enemy that did not play by established rules. And that sometimes the youngest and most primitive species could teach the oldest and wisest things they had forgotten or never known. She had learned that humans were not remarkable because of what they could do, but because of what they could endure. And she had learned, finally and irrevocably, that when a human warned you about monsters in the dark, you should probably listen, because humans knew monsters better than anyone. They had been looking in the mirror long enough to recognize the face.